Well, thank you, Casey. To start with, can you just state for the record your name and your name and the community where you live, and also where you were born and in what year?
Yeah, my name is Casey Houpert. I am currently living in Eugene, Oregon. I was born in New Mexico, but I grew up in Corvallis, actually. And I was born in 1997.
1997. Great. And can you just tell us what industry and occupation you're currently employed in?
Yeah, I am a barista, almost full-time barista at Starbucks
In Springfield.
in Springfield. Yeah.
And how many years have you worked there?
I am about 4 years. Yeah.
Okay. And can you describe a little bit your educational and occupational history or trajectory before they got you to Starbucks in Springfield?
So sorry, I think you're breaking up a little bit. Would you mind
Oh, I'm
repeating that?
sorry, Doran. My connection's not been so great today. Yeah, my question was just talking a little bit about your educational and occupational history that led you to then getting to work at Starbucks in Springfield.
Yeah, it started out as just a college job. I uh started in Corvallis, and then I transferred to the University of Oregon. Um, and I was on campus for a little bit. And then when COVID hit, I was transferred to the store in Springfield.
Mm-hmm. And is there anything particular that led you to get into this line of work that attracted you to it or recommended it to you as a place to work?
Honestly, not particularly. My first job was a coffee shop, and so I did have a little bit of background as a barista, and Starbucks was hiring at the time. I just needed some money to support myself while going to college. Yeah, and then the union movement happened, and I'm still there.
Great. If Can you describe, let me just ask you to talk a little bit about the work that you do. Can you just describe what it is that you do as a barista and perhaps what your work looks like? I don't know if there's a typical day, but just what the actual work it is you do and what your day looks like when you're working as a barista.
Yeah, so at Starbucks, we have like one singular level of employment. So a barista does all different types of jobs. Like we are our own dishwashers, our own food preppers, our own cleaners, and then we make drinks and interact with customers. So I would say um, it's a lot of like social work, interacting with people, slight money handling, and then yeah, working with the espresso machine and making drinks and a lot of memorizing recipes, that kind of work.
Hmm. So it's so just because I don't know this work that well. So am I hearing you right in saying that you do make coffee of various sorts, but you also do other things as well, but that's typically part of a barista's job description at Starbucks?
Yeah, pretty much. So, we're different than like a restaurant setting where there might be someone specifically hired to waitress or to cook the food or to be the host or uh, dish service. Pretty much everyone does everything on the floor at Starbucks.
Hmm. I see. And
Hmm.
can you talk a little bit, is there special training that you've had to have? I was sort of assuming that in terms of making those coffee drinks I see that look very, really interesting artistically and sophisticated, that there must be a fair amount of training that goes into that and perhaps other tasks as well. But could you talk a little bit about the training or how you've learned to do your job?
Yeah, I would say for me, and then also everyone who's hired, it's pretty standardized. there's a week or two long period of learning and practicing under like a certified trainer. Anyone is allowed to become a barista trainer, but you do have to like follow a training and certification process within the company. So anyone who's a barista trainer can do that training. And then I worked with them for 2 weeks, learning just like the different sections of the job. So, like the espresso bar area, learning the recipes, but then also learning like the POS system. So, like taking orders, creating recipes, working with money. And then there's like the standard like food service aspect where like you're learning about health codes and cleaning standards and um, properly disposing of like expired products, like that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's all wrapped up into the training of uh, various aspects we might have to deal with on the job.
Mhm. And what would you say are some of the most the things that have been most difficult in terms of learning your job, or what's been most challenging? Maybe would be perhaps another way to put it in terms of uh, assimilating the skills needed to do your job effectively or well.
Yeah, I think it is a really fast-paced environment. It almost requires a large amount of multitasking and being able to interact with a lot of people at once. And just the sheer amount of memorization that you have to be aware of, um, like knowing the whole menu, knowing important information about the menu to be able to talk to people about it, like ingredients in certain things, temperature standards, caffeine amounts,
Mm,
that sort of stuff. So um, you learn it as you go, but to start out with, it is like so much information.
mm.
Um, yeah.
And do you have anybody that kind of works with you, at least when you started, as kind of either an official or unofficial mentor, or somebody that kind of really is specifically designated to show you the ropes, or is that something that comes about more informally?
Yeah. So when you're first hired, you are assigned a specific trainer. So I was with that person solely for 2 weeks. But then after that, you're kind of just released into the work environment. And I would say a lot of people then hop on and take on the role of mentoring and teaching you and like helping you practice. Um, but there is only one like designated person who's paid for uh, the effort of training you.
Mhm. And is there room for, you talked about their measurements or standards, particularly I'm thinking about making different types of drinks. Is there room within that for independent judgment or creativity, or do you start to feel as if, well, here's the formula and I just have to execute it, or is it somewhere in between?
Yeah, I would say there's a lot of standard and rhythm and pattern to it. So it might be a lot to memorize, but once you have it, you pretty much get into a flow. I do think it becomes hard when that same equation is placed on like human connections. Like we have this corporate resource that is talking to us about like business goals and like using numbers and data analysis to show like this is the best way to interact with people and like the best way to connect with customers. And that can be a little bit emotionally draining. It's definitely geared towards a very specific type of person. And so some people might be totally fine in that environment and excel and like it's easy for them. And some other people might have to put a good bit of deal of like emotional effort to make uh to have those same behaviors in the workplace. So yeah, I would say it definitely comes at a cost, this like standard practice.
So does that mean that there are certain ways in which you are instructed to interact with customers and how you present yourself and things you actually say? I guess I'm curious about how detailed that is, or how, yeah, how broken out that is as far as the advice or even directives.
Yeah, I would say, like, it's hard to say that we're given an exact script. We're not really, but we do have a lot of on well, the company has a lot of online interaction with their customer base. So like customer service surveys are sent out. I know a lot of stores do this, like Safeway does this, where you have a chance to like rate your server or grade your experience. So we're all very aware of like the questions that are on those surveys, and like how the customers might respond to their interaction with us on that day. And then those are turned into scores, which are supposed to reflect like our basically our like welcomingness and like our customer experience for that store. And so knowing that analysis or that data is being collected, it does influence the way we interact with people a lot. Because if we know if they're gonna get a question that says, did your barista get to know you? You're gonna like kind of gear the conversation towards there so that they have something to answer.
Right.
So yeah.
And then do you have are there regular meetings with management or supervision then about your quote unquote customer evaluations? And are you in some ways judged about that or evaluated?
I think some stores do. My specific store, it's mostly just a lot of literature. So like we get posters posted up in the back. We get like these data sheets that show our progress and our results from the past couple months. And like there'll be little notes about, oh, things we can do to improve this, or like, here was a dip, like what went wrong there. Um, so it's mostly done passively at my specific store, but I do know it can be a pretty big deal and like a large talking point between managers and baristas.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask you a two-part question then. What are some of the things you most like about your work or that you find most enjoyable? And on the flip side of that, what are some of the things that you find most difficult or challenging?
Yeah, I think just bottom line, making drinks is really fun. Like steaming milk, pulling espresso shots, creating beverages. Um, that is just like objectively fun.
Mhm.
Um, I also think, you know, in a good environment, it can be really great. I have a great relationship with my coworkers. I have an okay relationship with my manager currently. We build relationships with our regulars. We see the same people every day. Um, and in some cases, we can be like a large part of someone's day, if it's thoroughly built into your routine. I think that's nice. Um, yeah, and then I would say on the flip side, a really challenging part is, at least for like a corporate company like Starbucks, I'm sure this happens a lot to many like fast food establishments or chain establishments, is we're like the first line of defense for customers uh, when they have criticism towards the company. Um, this has been happening most recently, like since the pandemic and switching back from like quarantine. Um, like the first time prices start going up, our prices usually increase every like launch season, so holiday seasons. Um, we're the face they see, even though we have nothing to do with any of those decisions.
Mm.
So a lot of concerns come to us and we have to deal with that, even though we don't have any uh, direct relationship with those decisions. Um, so yeah, I would say that's pretty challenging.
Mm, mhm, mhm. And I mean, I guess it seems fairly widely known or thought that the pandemic posed particular types of challenges, of course, for all kinds of workers. And I'm assuming that Starbucks, there were various types of challenges posed during the pandemic as well. Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, what it was like working, well, I don't mean to say the pandemic's over by any means, but just at the height
Yeah.
of it when there were so many unknowns, and just how that experience evolved for you and how it affected your work and your sense of, well, personal well-being and, personal stress even.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of stability was taken away for a lot of people. At the very beginning, we did have a pretty okay, um, I guess, like support system for our work. There was, I think, like a couple month long period where um, we were still figuring out whether or not we were essential workers. Um, People had the opportunity to take a paid leave from work. Um, but then pretty quickly, we were all called back. This is ending. We are going to be in person required to go to work. And I think that caused a lot of challenges with people with health problems. Like this is pre vaccinations. So there was still like a lot of really real concerns about coming back to work and um, being told that, well, this is the way it's going to be from now on. Sorry.
Mm,
Um, yeah, and then uh, also a lot of like business decisions happened that affected baristas. I know for me in particular, my store that I was at before the pandemic hit was shut down during COVID. So I came back for a little bit, was told my location is permanently closing. So then I had to jump around to a couple stores. And then I was able to find a permanent like home store in Springfield, but that's still in a different city than the one that I live in. Um, so we kind of just had to follow along to like where we're told to go, where the jobs are, where the openings are. So it felt like we've just been kind of pulled around for the ride.
mm.
Um, we're just like waiting around to see what they'll tell us next. Which I think is like where the union movement really picked up is like we can't take not having a voice anymore. Um, so it definitely rises a lot with anger and frustration. Unfortunately, those are the most powerful emotions to pull from. So hopefully, if we can use enough of that to make real change, then it won't have to get to this point again.
Mm. Yeah, and that opens the question I did want to ask you because I'm aware that there's, um, by mistake, that there's organizing going on. Well, certainly at Starbucks all over the country, it really is quite just a hotbed of union organizing. So I'm kind of curious, just if you could talk about your own orientation or how you got involved. I don't know if you came from a union background at all, or just the circumstances got you talking with other people, or there was a bit of a snowball effect from other Starbucks. But could you talk a little bit about just your just how you got involved first, and then a little bit more about just what the organizing process has been like?
Yeah, yeah, I guess I would say I do come from a line of union work. Both my parents are teachers, and the teachers union is really strong, and was really present in my household. My grandparents came from steel workers and cleaning staff at the university. So there was a lot of union presence in those careers as well. But I do think, in general, the idea of unionizing service work uh, is like an image in people's minds that doesn't necessarily hold the same weight. So I think that has been uh, a very difficult thing to overcome is like trying to like brush up against the stigma that it's unskilled labor, and um, unions have been for more career-led uh,
Mm,
or for like more career-based organizations. So um, yeah, I mostly got involved just by talking to people and following the movement on social media. Because I'm in Eugene, I have had a pretty nice view of all the union activity happening in the Eugene Starbucks world. So I've had a couple contacts at those stores, who then put me in contact with one of the representatives from Workers United. And then we were able to just talk like one-on-one on a very specific basis, like my store specifically, and going over like the process, all the steps. Um, and then, yeah, there's like the legal side, the official side, and then I would say there's the morality side, which is just like talking and being involved in the community as much as possible and like getting that motivation from other people. So yeah, staying involved with like the Eugene Union movement has been really helpful.
mm, mhm. Um, and I guess one thing I'm curious about, particularly with Starbucks, is that I know that Starbucks calls its workers or its employees partners. And I know that the union has adopted a slogan, let partners be partners. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, your sense of the notion of partnership, because at least on the face of it, people say, gosh, Starbucks looks like a really great place to work. Because first they say that you're partners, there are tuition benefits, there's health benefits, there's a number of things that suggested a certain level of enlightenment, quote unquote, as an employer. Yet this has become really one of the hottest union organizing venues in the nation. So I'm just curious, you could talk about how that lands with you personally as far as the 4 years you've been at Starbucks, and then its relationship to wanting an independent voice, which I know the company calls a third party, but I've always found kind of interesting. But if you could just talk a little bit about this whole notion of partnership and then what it is that the union wants to accomplish.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, Starbucks is very good at marketing. I will give them that. Yeah, the idea of partners is nothing if not a facade. But the idea comes from we are allowed to have stock in the company. I am honestly not well versed in the stock market accessibility. It is super complicated. It is not set up for us, even though we do have access to it on like becoming employees. We do have like a selection of uh, stock options that are available to us as employees. And so that kind of gave them an edge to be able to call us like partners because we are a part of the profitability of this company. Um, I've never seen my stocks. Um, it's done through like a third party website. I hope I set it up right. But I've also heard a lot from people that they've quit or left or tried to cash out, um, only to see that like, oh, for some reason, this, that, and the other, they were no longer able to access that stock. So you'd have to talk to someone else about that, honestly. Um, but yeah, this idea is that it's a super like homegrown style company where everyone is on the same playing field. Like us as partners should feel like we have just enough of a right to have a relationship with like upper corporate level people. Um, but it's like pretty easy to tell that we don't. We get the same memos from the top of the chain of like this is how it's going to be and we follow, and um I don't really ever hear our voice getting heard ever. So yeah, it's pretty much just a name, just like an idea. And then yeah, the union movement has taken it as really uh their chance to say, hey, you use this word with us every single day. This is what we're called as employees here. Why not make that the truth? Why not actually give us a position of power in this company that you say, we mean a lot to? Um, so yeah, that is kind of the illusion of the partner, but
And and if you were to not boil it down so much, but just to articulate what it is, at least for you personally, perhaps, and maybe for others, what it is you most want that you think you can realize through having a union.
yeah, I mean, like you can either boil it down to we want more power, we want like more voice and to be taken into account when these decisions are made in the company. But I think even more so, like the bottom line is uh money and benefits, like making sure that our wages and our time off is reflective of the work that we do, which is a lot. That ratio has been thrown off wildly. Right now we're working on like non-economic proposals. So basically more say in like the dress code that happens at work, anything that isn't directly money related.
Mhm.
So like dress code, um, a better defense of like respect. So if a manager is being disrespectful, like racist, homophobic, oppressive in any manner, we have a better defense for that, and more protection in the workplace, more structure and limitations on like uh, write ups or punishments in the workplace, stuff like that. Yeah, that's what we're working on right now.
Mhm. And can you talk a little bit, at least broadly speaking, there's been a lot of publicity that when Starbucks workers have tried to organize, well, certainly initially in Buffalo, they flew out their dream team of corporate leaders and managers and anti-union consultants to try to dissuade people from joining the union. And I guess with 300 plus Starbucks organizing, maybe the full court press can't be done at the same level everywhere. But I'm just kind of curious about what Starbucks did in response to your organizing in Springfield. And you've had a vote, right? Am I correct that you voted to have the union in Springfield?
Yes, we have had our vote, and yes, we did win our union. Um, Nothing has come of it yet. It only just happened a couple weeks ago, and we're still waiting for like things to happen at the national level.
Sure.
Um, but yeah, I will say honestly, our store has been pretty quiet. Other than an increase in like mandatory meetings with management, they would come and um either like indirectly talk about our experiences there or any problems we're having, like trying to fix things like internally as a company, or um like blatant informative meetings, like talking about the union, making sure we have all the information coming from them, um, and talking to us about like the importance of the upcoming vote, that sort of stuff. Um, but I would say compared to other stores and other like blatant union busting tactics, I will say we did have it pretty easy. Um, Not that it's ever easy. I do think like the environment shifted a little bit. Our manager uh, got a little nervous and, you know, started relying heavily on like rules and standardizations that weren't there previously. So I do think tensions were created, but um, yeah, from what I've heard from other people, uh, it does seem that we had like a softer integration into the union.
Mm-hmm. So the level of campaigning was perhaps not as strong or as aggressive as it was perhaps in some other facilities.
Yeah, for sure.
Mhm. And if was there one particular theme or argument that they used in these meetings? I'm curious because one thing I remember seeing an interview with Howard Schultz that he did with a New York Times financial reporter where he just came out and said, we can't have a third party, quote unquote, a union and have our business model succeed, which was a pretty stark thing to say. I'm just curious if that argument has been one they've been making with you, that there's an incompatibility with having a union, or just are there other arguments that have been most repeated most often to try to dissuade you all from organizing?
Yeah, for sure. A lot of sentiment like that has been shared. Things like your relationship with your manager is going to change drastically. They will no longer be able to work with you on the floor, or you will no longer be able to come to them for issues you're having. You will have to go through the union, and it's going to be like this completely disconnected store from the company. They'll no longer be able to share resources. Um, like the store environment and the way you do things is going to be completely uprooted and changed. A lot of that sentiment, which is just like a complete farce and their own language of like trying to use scare tactics. It is something that tries to like dispel the confidence in our union, specifically because I would say that a lot of the stuff they're saying isn't like not even a possibility. It is 100% possible if we decide to use the union in that way. If we no longer trust our manager or if we no longer want to have that relationship, we can bring in the resources of the union and do that. But they're making it seem like us trying to take the power is exactly what is going to take the power away from us. Um, so yeah, it's a lot of word manipulation and like message crossing.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, we have definitely heard a lot of that.
Mhm. Yeah. I wanted just to turn you back a little bit to a couple of things you said before, because you used some terms in terms as far as describing your work. So, because you talked about this being a service industry and people think of it as unskilled labor, and also we talked used the term essential, which I think has certainly entered our public vocabulary since COVID. And I just wanted to ask you if you could talk a little bit about how those terms, how you relate to those terms. Specifically, do you consider yourself an essential worker or your work is essential? And second, do you consider your work skilled rather than quote unquote unskilled? I'm just wondering how you think about those terms as they apply to you in your work.
Yeah, I 100% think it is skilled. I do. I think it's a certain type of skill. I think some people might find it easy, whereas other people really struggle with it. And that all depends on like practice and personality. And I think that's true with any industry, um, whatever we choose to go into. Um, so yeah, as far as essential workers, I I feel like society has required us to be essential workers. Um, I think it really showed during like the lockdown section of the pandemic. I don't think we had to be open. I don't think we were necessary, but society required us to be necessary because when we were open, people were still coming to get their coffee and they were still using us for our work. And we serve hundreds and hundreds of customers every day who we are completely necessary for us getting them through the day. So yeah, I think in that sense, we have become essential because I don't think people can easily live without it. Um, so I think our recognition and our treatment needs to reflect that.
Yeah, because I'm thinking that, and I don't mean this at all to be, to be like facetious at all, but I mean, coffee is pretty damn important, it seems. I guess I'm just wondering how you feel about actually this product that you produce, that it seems like it's really important to lots of people, whether you just get a straight up cup of coffee that's black and you put whatever in it or not, or something that's fancier that maybe has an aesthetic impact on you, a sensory effect, I mean, all kinds of things. I'm just wondering, in terms of somebody who creates these things, how that makes you feel or how you react to that thought about the creations that you're creating.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, coffee is a pretty big part of my life. I do enjoy it a lot and I get paid to make it for other people. Yeah, I do think, you can take it as far up as you want it. If you just want to run in, get a quick cup of coffee to like wake you up or keep you alert for your job, whatever. It could be a 2-second interaction and that's fine. Or it can be like the biggest part of your morning. And the first thing you do to start your day, the first faces you see in your coffee shop every morning, and like that can be a large part of your social interaction in your life. So I think, yeah, it's a really big range for how people engage with it. I don't think it'll ever be more important than people, though.
Hmm. Yeah, and that I was just kind of wondering that because it seems to me, and you were talking about, there's some people that just come in, get their coffee and leave. I don't know. Do you all have a drive-in or at Springfield or not?
We do, yeah.
Yeah, 'cause that's
Mhm.
one thing, I guess people drive up, that's all about speed, I would think, and getting it. Maybe you know some of the drive-in folks because they come regularly or maybe not. But I guess I'm also, and maybe this is a stereotypic image, but I think about the coffee shop as a place where people come, where they can hang out, where they bring their laptops, they bring a paper. But I don't know if it's too strong to say there's a certain coffee culture in terms of people that have a familiarity with a place and a little bit the old cheers, everybody knows your name thing. If that type of thing goes on and how that affects you or makes you feel as a worker in that environment.
Yeah, definitely. I do think we have a small culture like that. I think like as a business model, we're probably gearing more towards like fast food every year. We're growing in that regard, but we do have like a solid set of regulars that we see every day. They come and do work in the cafe, they get refills, they talk to us. We interact with them like past the making of their beverage. And yeah, I think that's like a really important part to my day, to break up the monotony and like make it feel a little bit stronger
Mm.
than just a job.
Yeah, yeah. So do you feel that way then, as a broad kind of conception that it feels at least more than just a job at some level? Are there some deeper satisfactions that you draw from it beyond, I mean, having to work and get a paycheck and support yourself and all of that? Is there something deeper about this work that goes on for you?
Yeah, there definitely used to be. Yeah, I loved that part of my job and I didn't hate going in. Um, it was fun and then I got to be paid on top of that. Um, but I think um at a certain point you kind of get jaded a little bit and the effort no longer becomes worth the treatment and the pay. So, um yeah, I would say that is an aspect of my job that I really enjoy. Um, I don't know if it holds up as much as it needs to
Mm.
in a work environment.
And do you have any sense? I mean, I've read some things, I haven't looked at it intimately, but this sense that Starbucks is a company that's changing or it's talking about where it needs to get in the future. And I'm just wondering your sense of changes you've seen in the industry and where you think it may be going and how that will affect the people that work there.
Yeah, I think it's always changing. Maybe not in terms of uh like their business model. I think they've always been like a pretty for-profit company. And that comes with like certain business ideals, but I do think we're constantly ramping up expectations and constantly lowering tolerance for not meeting those. So the environment is like growing more and more hostile every period, um, with us being confronted with like the profit side of the company, I guess.
You mean more pressures in terms of productivity and quality and how you do your work?
Yeah, absolutely. And like not given the resources in order to pull that off all the time. So like it's only going to get harder and harder to do our jobs, and we don't feel the same changes happening in like the methods and resources that were given to do that job. Um, yeah.
And and that might be something that the union could take up, I'm assuming, that is to
Yeah,
be able to do your job effectively and feel better about it.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, we're fighting for resources, for sufficient staffing, like regulations, and standards, more protection from like customers. Yeah, we're fighting for a better work environment and whatever details that entails as it comes up.
Yeah, and that raises just one kind of last thing I wanted to ask you about, and sort of want to give you an opportunity to add some things as well. But I was curious if we talk a little bit more just about customer relations, because obviously it's a huge part of what you do, and I assume sometimes it can be really enjoyable and uplifting, and other times perhaps other things. And I'm thinking particularly under the pressures, it's at least in a lot of environments you hear about this in service industries or jobs, whether people are on the air, or a flight attendant on an airline or in a number of other places, that customer relations have become more fraught or difficult, certainly as a result of the pandemic and perhaps extending. So I was just wondering how that's played out in your experience.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think uh interacting with customers is getting harder and harder, and I think we don't have as much power to stand up for ourselves anymore. We still mostly follow the model that like the customer is always right, and like always putting our customers first, sometimes at the risk of like the emotional well-being of our coworkers. Um, so yeah, sorry, what was the second part of your question?
Well, it was just this sense of customer relations, if they've in some way become more challenging during the pandemic. I mean, because on the one hand, I assume there's satisfactions with customer relationships, but it also seems like they've become more challenging or fraught during the pandemic as well, with people coming in already stressed themselves at some level, and that stress getting transferred onto, as you said earlier, the frontline person that they're dealing with.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think there's an element to probably a lot of chain restaurants, but Starbucks specifically, it sells a large image and consistency. Like no matter what Starbucks you go to, you're gonna get your favorite drink and your favorite experience, and like that's just not really possible because we are not uh robots making drinks. We're very human and we make human mistakes. We can standardize it as much as possible. But it's almost unfair to guarantee that you will get the same exact drink, your favorite drink every single time.
Mm.
And so that definitely creates strenuous interactions with people. I also think like business and profit compete a lot with a customer experience. So like having to deal with customers in the drive-through, a lot of people would make the argument that the thing that they care most about is their time, and they would love to get through the drive-through quickly. But again, as I said earlier, we have this survey that comes to all of our customers, or it's randomized to all customers who use like the Starbucks app. So we're in the drive-through trying to like talk to you and answer have you answer these questions, um, which then inevitably takes time and makes like the line pile up and the drive times go up. But then if those stay down and if we get everyone out really quickly, we didn't talk to you as long. So
Mm.
you now no longer have a reason to answer any of these questions.
Mm.
Even though there's no real saying if that is important to the customer. Because we do get responses every once in a while. Like, I don't see why it's important for the barista to get to know me. I don't know why that's a question that's related to my experience. I can still have a great experience even if they didn't. So yeah, I think those are constantly competing, and like as they push us to get people out faster and faster and like have a larger pool of customers, um, then those interactions are going to get shorter and shorter, and then our customer connection scores are going to go down. So like they're expecting us to have both and not giving us a way to do both.
Mm.
So yeah, I think that will only get like more and more prioritized as we go on.
Right. Yeah, I could see how that could be pretty frustrating, these competing impulses, and they seem to be ratcheting up based on what you're saying.
Hmm.
Um, well, let's see. I think I'm just going to take a quick look over my questions here. Yeah, I guess one other just thing about your work. We've alluded to this a little bit, Casey, but I just want to ask you if you would say, are there any special skills or personal qualities that you would say you need to do your job, whether they're emotional, physical, your sense of judgment, just in terms of doing your work? Anything you'd say these are really good skills that you either acquire or are useful to kind of have? Because sometimes there's a term emotional labor that people use as far as work. They've done it in various types of caring environments and all of that, that there's a lot of emotion that goes into the work because you're dealing with people. So I'm just curious about any types of skills or qualities you see, or even if the idea of emotional labor resonates, but just how you think about that in terms of your work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a huge factor of emotional labor. I think our job requires a lot of brain work. It might be repetitive, but um, like we're constantly listening to customers, doing something completely different with our hands, trying to talk to our coworkers. And then on top of that, it takes a lot of emotional control to kind of not let any of the chaos that's happening behind the bar
Mm.
be projected out to the customer. So I've found that it's like a double-edged sword. You kind of uh, learn to like maybe turn your mind numb a little bit to block out some customers that might be stressed out or short-tempered or getting more upset than you may think appropriate about a mistake or like something that's probably motivated by other aspects in their life, but it's coming to you. Um, and like not every situation is worth like complete disengagement. So yeah, you kind of go numb, but then that also translates to kind of becoming numb for the good stuff too, like not having enough mental energy to talk as long with the regular that comes in later in the afternoon, or not finding the same joy when like a group of kids come in and like are getting their favorite drinks. So like it's hard to find a balance between what you're willing to spend your energy on, because it's hard to do both sometimes.
Yeah. It sounds like you have a particularly high level of multitasking on a range of spheres, so to speak.
Yeah, quite a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think these are, my essential questions, but I wanted to just open the door for you, Casey, and so much appreciate you taking time. It's really been an education for me, certainly, and I assume it will be for others. But if there's anything you want to add, just as you reflect about your work or the union, your relationship to it, anything that we haven't covered that you'd like to add or reflect on.
Yeah, I guess I would just like to stress that I really believe in this as a labor movement. I know Starbucks is like kind of wielding the helm right now, in terms of like how fast we're spreading, but I really don't want this to be thought of as like the time Starbucks tried to unionize. Like, I hope it is seen as a labor movement for everyone to participate in, like Amazon, Trader Joe's, Chipotle, all these different industries that also deserve the same rights that we're fighting for. So,
Yeah. So you really see yourself as, if I can use the term, a bit in a vanguard as far as a broader labor movement and other service industries trying to organizing.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, listen, I'm gonna thank you and hit stop on recording. I do have a couple other things I'll say to you kind of off the record, but let me just